Okay, Jack, thank you again for taking the time to join me on the podcast.
No problem. Absolutely honoured, considering the lineup of guests as I was reading through the sort of the most recent guests on your podcast, and like PhD, science,
Wait,
amazing, and I'm just like,
do you
vegan
not
coach.
do you not have a PhD? Is this because otherwise we're going to have to cut recording right now, and because I mean
No.
that is the entry level for this podcast.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not up to scratch.
It's okay. Don't worry.
I'll work on it.
Yeah, it's
Next
okay.
time I'll have it.
I think we'll be able to scrape through. No, but I mean, just give the listeners a bit of an overview of who you are, what it is you do at the moment.
Yeah, so my name is Jack Collins. I am a coach at the Empowerment Training Centre, a newly founded Empowerment Training Centre in Northampton, working with Mr. Tim Reed, who was one of your cohorts on Mac Nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I'm a coach there, and I am a level 4 vegan.
Level 4 vegan, great. What does it take to what are the classifications of veganism to reach level 4?
Classifications of veganism. I
Is it
honestly
just based
don't
on
know.
how many people you tell?
Yeah, how many people you tell. So I think it's like per 1,000 people you ascend to the next level of veganism.
Right. Okay. So you're currently on sort of 4,000 and counting.
Yeah, 4,000 counting.
And depending on the sort of 100 or so people that download this episode, then you've reached another 100 or so there.
Yeah.
So that's great. And yeah, so good that you've brought up the vegan card straight away, stereotypical of you, to bring that up as your identity, as it were. And we're here to discuss a little bit about the game changers, but more about general, being a vegan, training hard, and kind of what you need to pay attention to. You've seen the documentary, haven't you?
Yes.
So, I mean, before we go into, we don't want to make a completely biased thing against it. What would you say were the sort of good points of the documentary, or things that you would really believe with?
Well, it was a well put together documentary, as with most of these things are. Like, they are as they're intended to be. It's well put together. It tells a good story, and it is very compelling. Like, I watched it, and even I was saying this to Tim yesterday when we were in the car. I was like, I felt renewed in my love for veganism, and there was even times where I caught myself believing in things, and I was like, that could be true, because it aligns with my bias, and I was like, I wanted it to be true. So I had to kind of sort of bring myself back down and be like, okay, I know that they're going to be cherry picking certain information. But yeah, it was really well put together. It does tell a good story. It highlights the good things about veganism. And yeah, so I really enjoyed it. But yeah, as we said, it definitely has an agenda along with it.
Of course, yeah. And I think we need to realize that with anything that we watch or listen to, in that, there's been backlash against the documentary, not for the entire message, because if people want to become plant-based for health purposes or for ethical reasons whatsoever, then they're perfectly entitled to do so. It's more of a case of, we don't have the evidence as of yet to claim what they were saying against meat eaters. We know that meat eaters get a bad rap when it comes to observational evidence because of the amount of junk food that contains meat-based products. And the fact that you can't compound for those variables of exercise and everything else when it comes to lifestyle-related diseases.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that I did notice. So going through the film, they were flashing up studies when they were making a claim. They would flash up, let's say, 2 to 4 different studies, and they would kind of have half the abstract and potentially half the conclusion. I did try to sort of screenshot those as I was going through and sort of read through to make sure they were actually claiming what was on the study. And I did notice with several of them, they were that kind of observational food frequency questionnaires, similar to the studies that we've seen throughout MNU, where it was like, oh, this study showed a very strong correlation between people who eat meat and cancer, but it was a food frequency questionnaire, and it doesn't account for all those confounding variables like smoking. People who smoke often have a better diet because they are less health conscious. So I was trying to pick up on some of those things as I was going through as well.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to stay aware of, this idea of a lot of diet-based studies are always going to be observational and longitudinal because they have to be. So they have to say, right, well, we've got a demographic here. Let's follow them for years and years and see what happens to them. The only way that you're going to be able to do that is to observe from a distance. You're not going to be able to do that in a controlled fashion. But as you said, a lot of people who are vegetarian, vegan, plant-based are often more health-seeking, health-conscious. They might shop at Whole Foods. They might cook more of their own food, eat less junk food, exercise regularly, not smoke, etc., which all leads into better health outcomes. But, if we were to cherry pick evidence, I'm sure I could find evidence that keto was a superior fat-burning diet, that, eating only meat and embracing the carnivore fashion was better for blood markers. Do you know what I mean? That is the issue when you're like, here's one study that shows this one thing.
Yeah, and there was one study in there where they highlighted the difference between, I'm almost sure it was they did a resistance-based training protocol for 8 weeks, and one of the studies they had a group of people on a ketogenic diet, so a high meat diet or a higher protein, higher fat diet, and then a vegan or vegetarian based diet. And it was like, oh, these people gained more lean body mass. Right, of course they did, because the ketogenic people weren't eating any carbohydrates. And then the vegan people, who may not have been eating a high carbohydrate diet, were throwing loads of carbohydrates. So that's obviously going to lead to a higher lean body mass when you measure it at the end.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's those sort of things that I was trying to pick up on as well.
Yeah, it's overall, as you said, it's one of those where there are a lot of good within the documentary, but unfortunately it's one of those where a lot of what they come up with, it's one of those where they brought up things like, the amount of greenhouse gases that meat production is the same as like all of the cars on the earth or whatever, and you're like, how did you even come to this conclusion or find that data?
And the interesting point about that one actually is when you compare that to the cowspiracy documentary, which is one of the first ones that I watched that turned me to the dark side. That is they were claiming that 51% of all global CO2 emissions came from animal agriculture and all the transportation, everything like that. But then you compare that to the 15%. Why is
there such a big difference?
How does it go from 15 for all animal agriculture, which encompasses pollution from CO2, to 51%? That's kind of a big difference when you factor in all the different things that go into that. So
yeah, and that's in the years since cowspiracy, they've done a good job in bringing them down. And I think animal agriculture is on that same wavelength. Everyone's becoming more and more emission conscious and global warming conscious, and everyone's trying to do their best to bring those things down. But it's one of those where like it definitely plays on your heartstrings with regards to.
And that was again, I was saying this to Tim yesterday, that was another key point of the documentary. There was lots of heartfelt stories along with it, like the guy who was like the main person who was kind of like leading the documentary, who was doing all like the interviewing people and going to meet people. His dad had a heart attack and had a life history of, I think he had 2 heart attacks or 1 heart attack. I think he was like a long-term smoker, potentially. That might be, don't quote me on that one. But he had like a typically high cholesterol. He'd had a pretty bad diet throughout his life. And it was kind of following the story of his transformation from having a heart attack to going vegan and having better health.
Right.
And then there was also another story where there's this guy who'd gone to Africa who was doing animal conservation, and his story from transferring from non-vegan to vegan because he was looking after the animals, but he was eating animals at the same time. And then at the end, when they were talking about like saving the animals and saving the rainforest and stuff, they were flashing up images of endangered rhinos and elephants and stuff. And you're like, are they endangered because of people eating meat, or are they endangered because the poachers you just mentioned are killing them for their horns? And you're just kind of like tugging on the heartstrings with some heartfelt music. But
yeah,
there's a direct correlation with some of the things they were mentioning throughout that.
No, absolutely not. Like the rhinos and elephants being endangered is a terrible thing, and it's much more down to poaching and selling their horns, as you said, like ivory salesmen, things like that. And even for sport, I think that a lot of them do it for. But you know, your first point about this man making this dramatic health-based transformation, it is again that idea of look, if you have a crappy diet in any way, shape or form, and potentially smoke and don't get a lot of exercise, you are going to suffer from a lifestyle related disease.
Yeah.
And you can do that with or without eating meat, because I'm very sure that there will be plenty of vegetarian and vegan people who actually don't have good quality diets.
Absolutely. And that's a point that Martin McDonald makes. It's either in one of the MMU lectures or he made it in a live day, where he was saying like he was working with someone, might have been part of one of his football teams or something like that, and they were a vegetarian. And they gave him he'd given Martin like an example of his diet, or he talked you through his diet. And he was basically like, so you're not a vegetarian, you're a junk food-tarian. And there's like, especially nowadays with the prevalence of like meat-free products or vegan junk food, like people are transitioning over, and it's much easier, but they're not just transitioning over to a plant-based diet. They're transitioning over to a plant-based junk food diet in many cases.
Yeah, so talk us through that. What would that look like, I guess, for someone who's making a conscious thought to start to become more plant-based, to avoid this whole idea of, well, I still want my diet to be like higher quality. What kind of things do you look out for, or like how do you manage it, I guess, would be a good question.
So I do eat some of those like typical junk food products, like vegan or non-vegan, like ice creams. It's still ice cream at the end of the day. It's not going to be the most health conscious thing you can probably eat. It's high calories or high palatability. But typically I try to have a consistent structure where I'm getting the majority of my protein from plant-based sources, whether that be soy-based products predominantly, so tofu or tempeh, they'll make up the bulk of my protein feedings. And then I'll kind of support that with some beans as like a carbohydrate source in meals that aren't typically near training sessions. And then I'll have a plant-based protein as well, as like my other 1 or 2 protein feedings. If I'm having sort of 4 to 6 a day, I have 2 to 3 soy-based ones of the whole foods, and then I'll have like 1 to 2 of a protein shake. And then typically I just try to get like 2 to 3 sort of full meals of carbohydrate sources, vegetables, things like that. And then I'll have some sort of faster digesting carbohydrates around the workouts, depending on that. So it might be some fruit, oats and honey with a protein shake pre or post workout, or a smoothie in the morning. I generally have a smoothie, so it might be like banana, milk, protein, again, maybe some honey and some oats in that as well. And that's typically day to day. That's kind of the main structure that I'll follow. If I'm trying to gain weight, I'll add rice instead of beans, just to make it more palatable and easier to get the food volume in. And then I might change the banana for some berries if I'm trying to bring the calories down. But typically that's what it looks like most days, with the kind of inevitability of plant-based sources being much lower in leucine. I'm more limited on my protein sources as far as whole foods are concerned. So I'm limited to that tofu tempeh for the majority of my meals. I don't have the luxury of chicken, fish, beef, all these different options that I can select through. So I kind of have to be more similar. And then if I want to have something that's different, like if I go out for a pizza or something like that, then I'll kind of just add a protein shake either before or after I leave or get home, just so I'm kind of making sure I'm getting another serving of protein that I'm very unlikely to get at a restaurant. But yeah, that's typically day-to-day what I kind of strive for.
Yeah, perfect. I think it's a good way that you just looked at there, where you were saying, well, because we know that beans and lentils and other legume sources like chickpeas, etc., are quite like high in protein for a carbohydrate source as far as they go. Also very fibrous, very good for us. And then a lot of vegetarian / plant-based people would maybe look for that to be like the main part of their meal. Whereas you're actually thinking, no, that's your carbohydrate source. And the fact that it's got some protein within it is just an added bonus. But your main, your main meat of the meal is like the tofu or tempeh. How do you get that to taste good?
You're asking the wrong person. The most unchef-like human ever. Again, typically I I'm not very creative with my cooking, so I typically just chop it up into cubes, fry it. I haven't quite mastered the art of getting it to cook all the way through. So
Right.
I make sure it's fried somewhat on each side, and then I just use sort of basic sauces. Like I love sriracha chili sauce. Sriracha chili sauce and beetroot is one of my favorite combinations, actually.
Oh yeah.
Fresh beetroot, maybe a couple of beetroots, loads of sriracha chili sauce, a little bit of water. That makes quite a nice sauce. Typically just general sauce packets that I can buy from Sainsbury's.
Yeah.
Put it in there. So some of the better ones that have less sugar and less sort of stuff in. But yeah, just sauce packet, vegetables, tofu. Tofu generally takes up flavor a lot better than tempeh, I've found.
Right.
I haven't marinated tempeh, but maybe generally marinating tofu and tempeh is the best way to go. Leave it like overnight on the side or in the fridge. And tofu will generally absorb a lot of the flavor. Tempeh is the same. But yeah, I'm just lazy. I haven't got time for that. I was like, take it out of the fridge, chop it up, fry it, get it in my mouth.
Mate, yes, simple is best, isn't it? When you're up against the clock, and
absolutely.
I think what you said there about using like just spices and sauces and things like that from bought places. A lot of people are very against using them for whatever reason. There's a big like stigma against that, and a whole like, oh, everything needs to be cooked with all your own herbs and spices. And it's like, well, actually, you're cooking most of the food yourself anyway. Like just add a pack of mixed spices together. It's not. It's not going to derail you.
That's still an internal bias that I've had from back in the day when it was chicken, rice, and broccoli 8 times a day. And it couldn't be anything else. It couldn't have anything more than a bit of salt and pepper on.
Yeah,
that's still like a bias that I hold inside. As much as I kind of forget it when I'm having a meal out, and I think everyone does. They're like, oh, it's like eat healthy at home. It has to be grass-fed, organic, and then you go out to a meal, and you just like ice cream and everything.
Pizza and ice cream. It's fine.
Yeah, but then when you're at home, it's like, oh, I'm making a meal. I can't possibly put this pre-prepared sauce on, which is basically exactly the same as it would be had I made it myself.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's just generally what I do.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people need to be aware of, is this idea of like homemade sauces and spices and stuff. It's like effort level versus the benefit of health is completely skewed toward massive effort, no benefit. So it's like you might as well save your time in prep and make it life easier for yourself. But I love that. I love that idea of, you've basically got then like an idea of maybe like non-workout and workout plate foods. You've got that idea of tofu or tempeh, carb-based bean sauce, and then extra vegetables. And then if it's closer to a workout, either pre or post, it's more of a starchier carbohydrate sauce, fruit, that kind of thing. And that's then just the template that you follow day in, day out.
Yeah, and then it just allows it to be so much more flexible and interchangeable. So like I said, back in the day when it was chicken, rice, and broccoli, every 3 hours on the 3 hours, there was no flexibility for meals. Like if a meal got pushed back, it was like there was no room to move the meals around. Yeah. Whereas with this kind of structure that I've sort of worked out is best for me, is like I can move those meals around in any way, shape, or form. So like if I'm working out first thing in the morning, I can have my scoop of protein that would have been in the smoothie, maybe with a banana, and then head straight to the gym. And then when I get back, I can make the smoothie and put the extra oats and carbs and stuff in that smoothie. And that's my 2 smoothies. And then I'll have 2 solid meals in the rest of the day. Or if I'm working out in the evening, I can have my 2 solid meals first and then have my smoothie and my thing either side of my workout again. And just all the meals kind of just can be interchangeable and put wherever.
Perfect.
It just takes that stress of, I have to eat this meal at this time. I have to train at this time. It just makes life so much easier.
Well, exactly. You're taking flexible dieting on board, aren't you? By basically saying these are like templates of my meals based on my activity level and what I'm doing. And then I can move those about depending on my schedule, which kind of frees up, as you said, you're following almost a structure, but it's flexible. It's not a rigid meal plan based idea.
It's like I said, it's like tracking without tracking. It's like, because I've tracked for so long, I know roughly within 100 calories how much a smoothie is going to be with just eyeballing it.
Of course, yes.
Like if I want to gain weight and I want to add 500 calories to my diet to put me into a 300 calorie surplus or whatever based on where my calories are. Yeah. Now I need to change that. For a banana, I need to add 40 grams of oats and I need to change my beans to 100 grams of rice. And that's it. Like it's what it's always been. I always work it out before I do it. But once I've started doing it, I'm like, oh, I didn't even need to work it out because it's exactly what I would have guessed it to be.
Sure. And I guess when you first turned vegan after watching Cowspiracy,
Yeah.
did you pick up MyFitnessPal to think, actually, you know, because I know that I train, I need to have a certain amount of protein, I'm looking at a certain amount of calories. Did you track at first to get that
Um,
balance right, or was it more intuitive at
not
first?
not initially. I'd moved away from tracking when I first went vegan.
Hmm.
Before I went vegan, I'd slightly moved away from tracking.
Right.
I can't remember why, because I tracked religiously for probably 2 years.
Hmm.
It was chicken, rice, and broccoli to the exact gram of like broccoli. It was the exact gram of broccoli, the exact grains of rice. And then I'd moved away from tracking, and then I became vegan, and I kind of followed every vegan, like all these different areas within veganism. You've got like the 80-10-10, high carb, low fat. You've kind of got that was kind of it actually at the start. It was like, that was where all vegans were going, because it was kind of
Right.
like the vegan YouTube channels like Durian Rider and Freely, like they were the big two. It
Okay.
was before kind of vegan gains had come around, and he kind of was like, oh, you actually do kind of need some protein. And then it kind of transitioned from there, and the really high carb, they were like, calories don't matter. You can eat as many carbs as you want, and you won't get fat, no matter how many calories it is. Yeah, I went there. Considering I was someone who had tracked and understood calories, I
Yeah.
fell for it. And
Yeah.
they sold it to me as they do with most people who turn to veganism.
Yeah.
And then I kind of moved towards, oh, protein's important, and then kind of got back to tracking a little bit.
Hmm.
But it took like a couple of years for that transition to happen, from like eating as much as I possibly could and as many carbs as I possibly could, and not really understanding protein as I do now,
Yeah.
to then kind of moving to protein's important. I need to eat protein, but still not understanding leucine.
Sure.
And then sort of we jumped up at 12, 13 months ago, where I started M&U and I started learning more about nutrition. And then that's kind of when my nutrition really took like an upward turn quite quickly to where it is now, and sort of the diet I had in place and the knowledge that I have now.
For sure. And are there other, you know, because you say now you're very meticulous about where you get your protein sources from, and I love the fact that you include maybe 1 to 2 shakes of a plant-based protein, and you combine your protein sources together as well to make these full amino acid chains, get enough leucine. But are there other supplements that you have to take? Like, do you have to take vitamin B12 supplementation as well? Like, are there other things that you do to include a balanced diet, I guess is the question.
Yeah, so I generally try to make sure I'm getting enough vegetables. Again, that's something else that Martin said, is like, if you're a vegetarian, you need to actually make sure you're eating vegetables, even more so than, like, obviously eating vegetables is important for everyone. Like, everyone should have a plant-based diet.
Yes.
But as a vegan and vegetarian, someone who is less likely to be getting everything they need, like, your vegetables are important. Like your green leafy vegetables, like your green leaves, spinach, your kale, things like that, and then your broccolis and things like that. Like, you need to be getting some of those in to make sure you're getting the nutrients that are in those. B12, it's something that I've kind of thought about, but having spoken to people, and I've asked for I've spoken to my doctor about a blood test and stuff, and they kind of ran through the questions, and they're like, you're not experiencing anything related to B12 deficiency. You've got good energy, sleeping well, you're training well. Like, they just didn't even bother giving me a test.
Okay.
But I am aware of it, and it's included. So I do take a multivitamin, like a comprehensive vitamin.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I have a lot of plant-based milks, which are fortified with B12, generally B12, calcium, all things that vegans are generally deficient in. Like, most plant-based products are now fortified with those foods.
Sure.
Because we are aware that people are deficient in them.
Yeah. Because they're avoiding the natural products to have them in.
Yeah. So I'm aware of it, but I don't actively supplement with B12 singularly. I have looked into potentially doing B12 injections. But I think before I go down that route, I want to get a comprehensive blood test to make sure everything's where it is.
Yeah.
And then maybe look into that in the future, if I think it's even appropriate to do so.
Yeah.
And then other than that, that's about it really. Just making sure you get your vegetables, and then just making sure you've got a balanced diet. And then I do take, like I said, I do take a comprehensive multivitamin that pretty much covers everything else that I needed to cover.
Yeah. Have you ever taken leucine as a supplement by itself, or are you just quite conscious to mix protein sources together?
I have just recently, yes. But I've not used it too much. It's not something that you would notice a difference from anyway.
No.
It's more just covering your bases, really. It's like if I was having, because I'm having less meals at the minute, I'm typically having 4 meals a day at the minute, with one of them being like a shake and some fruit, and then one of them being either a smoothie or some food and a shake. Just because we've been so busy opening the gym and doing loads of sessions and stuff, I've not really had time to have my usual 5-meal structure.
Yeah.
And I've not been training as much as well. So because I've kind of combined my protein, I'm keep eating the same amount of protein foods in a day, and I've kind of split them across 4 meals rather than 5. I've not had to bother with the leucine because I'm getting enough leucine in each of those 4 servings. But I have just got some leucine. So when I moved to 5, like tofu, it's not expensive, but the amount I'm eating, it starts to add up.
Yeah.
You're looking like £3 a box. I'm having a box to a box and a half a day. You times that by 30 days, times that by a year. I'm like, shit, I'm spending like hundreds of pounds on fucking tofu a month. So,
mate, it's your fault.
Yeah. So, yeah, when I do want to have like if I just wanted to not have tofu, maybe have like beans and rice and vegetables and stuff. So I don't really want any more tofu. Then I look to add some leucine to that. So I make sure I'm getting a leucine serving, and then I'm still going to be getting my range of amino acids through the rest of the day. So I've got that pool of amino acids, and then I've got the leucine to trigger MPS as well, and just like a backstop. But yeah, that's a bit about it. That's all I take.
Yeah, perfect. And for those listening who might not be aware of why I'm basically talking as if people have read the blog that I've written on this, and the reason why we're banging on about leucine and amino acids is basically for muscle building and for them gains. It's the key amino acid to build muscle that we need, and if we're conscious about training, then that's vital. Did you with the amount of training that you do now, did you notice a bit of a difference when you started doing veganism? And obviously this is all anecdotal, which is what the Game Changers is massive on, with the, like a bunch of performance-based people saying they meant much better energy and whatever, but it's, a case for you. Did you actually have like a slump before you worked it all out and now you're fine? Like, how was that journey for you?
Initially, no. And then I sort of initially nothing really changed, and then I did experience a little bit of a slump because I was doing kind of CrossFit classes at the time, intermittently. I can't remember, sort of around the time I started CrossFit was also around the time that I became vegan, so I'm not sure which came first, but they did kind of cross over in the first year or so.
But your friends must have hated you for doing CrossFit and veganism at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't tell enough people. Literally, it's just I didn't know how to start a conversation, which one to go with. But yeah.
Hi, my name's Jack, and I'm a vegan CrossFitter. It's just basically your Instagram bio.
I think at one point it was
brilliant.
So yeah, I did experience a bit of a slump a few months in. I just wasn't getting enough protein. I'm not sure where my calories were, but they weren't high enough. Maybe I'd started to get some elements of deficiencies in some areas, but you can't really know until you get tested. But then I kind of went into the very high carb route, and I was just smashing calories in. So my calories came back up. My protein definitely wasn't where it needed to be. So I kind of I've always kind of had that skinny fat body. Like that's kind of my typical body type, if you like. So then it kind of just accentuated that. Like I was kind of doing lots of cardio through my CrossFit classes. I wasn't really doing a lot of bodybuilding stuff. So I come from a bodybuilding background before I went into CrossFit.
Right. Okay.
Putting 5 days a week to CrossFit classes 4 to 5 days a week, as well as going vegan. So I kind of had a little bit of a shift in my body composition to less muscle, more body fat, a bit more cardio based, which wasn't great. And then I kind of, from there, it kind of took an upward turn. I started getting more protein, more balanced meals. And then about 13 months ago, it really started to take a positive shift when I started learning about leucine and getting more protein servings, and I was getting less carbs and training much better, because it kind of around that time my training knowledge took a massive upturn as well.
Sure.
The past year has probably been the biggest for me as far as training and nutrition. Like everything's kind of where it needs to be for the results that I want. And yeah, so that's where it went.
Yeah, and that's been a long journey of trial and error and education.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good point for people listening, because a lot of people listening to this will do CrossFit, just from my background within that fitness regime, which, you know, we're unsure if we're even allowed to use the word on the podcast anymore. We might have to call it fit cross from this part out. But it's a good point, because actually people who compete in that sport and therefore do competitive training programs are training more often, more regularly, and therefore doing higher volume on bodybuilding type movements. Whereas if you're doing just a class for an hour, you're doing maybe 3 to 5 sets of a weight training movement and then a Metcon.
And maybe a couple of sets of curls in there.
And
it's not sufficient volume to grow muscle.
No.
Although it's high volume training, it's not high bodybuilding volume training.
No, and it's high intense, but as you said, in a metabolic cardiovascular effect. So even if you're doing things like push presses and squats within your Metcon, it's quite low volume actually, even through the Metcon, and low weight because of the idea of moving quickly. So it's not the same metabolic effect on your body composition at all. No. So if you're listening to this and you do CrossFit classes, it's just something to think about, or fit cross classes, whatever it is. Don't sue me. But no, great. It's great how you talk about that idea of you educated yourself on nutrition. It was a trial and error effort. It's one of those things where actually people that are going vegan, they're going to need to do their research, right? They're going to need to look in the right places. And you actually said just then you struggled at first because there were people that led you down the wrong path. And that is something that's a big issue these days, is media. Where do we turn to for advice? Who would be your go-to people in the vegan circle that people could follow for the best advice and for the best information regarding having a balanced diet, apart from obviously you and this podcast?
That's a good question. They're so few and far between. I mean, like, as far as like evidence-based vegans, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other than myself.
Brilliant. Well, there you go. You've just put yourself at the pinnacle of them all.
There we go. And any M&U students, obviously, any sort of M&U students will have a good understanding of, hopefully, like veganism and what things you need to be focusing on. They might not be able to advise you on all the different foods and recipes and the lifestyle, but they'll be able to tell you that leucine is important. So if you know leucine is important, you can Google what foods contain leucine, and then as long as you're including more of those, you're going to be heading in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Generally, vegan bodybuilders are going to be, as far as non-evidence-based people, vegan bodybuilders are going to be the best. There was one in the documentary, Nimai Delgado, one of those two. So obviously his meals are plant protein focused, and his diet is amazing. Like, food looks amazing. It's all plant based, obviously, but it's all like actual plants, not just plant lookalikes, if you like. So they're just like protein based meals, really healthy food. So they're going to be your second step down go-to people to follow. Some of them still say weird stuff. Like both of the vegan bodybuilders were talking about how the other bodybuilders couldn't believe how they're eating carbs and they were so shredded, and we're like, that's energy balance. That's nothing to do with the carbs. Yeah,
and carbohydrates are actually quite anabolic.
Yeah, so like whilst their diet is good, their understanding of why it's good is probably lacking.
Sure.
Yeah, just anyone, meat eater or not, evidence-based is going to be able to hopefully advise you on the way to go. And if they aren't necessarily plant-based, just ask them and they'll be like, oh yes, you should consider leucine, you should consider B12 vegetables, things like that.
Yeah. It comes down to that basic premise again, isn't it? About the fact that, like, even if you are plant-based, you could have a really bad quality diet.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
The quality diet for all humans needs to be like, make sure you're eating enough fruit and veg throughout the day. Whole grains and fiber are important. protein
like
is
a
important.
plant-based diet. Like everyone should have a plant-based diet.
Yes.
The center of your diet should be
Vegetables.
high quality fruits, vegetables, and then you either have tofu or you have meat. Like the general diet should look the same, unless you're like an outlier, like you're an endurance athlete, which is going to have a more skewed macronutrient breakdown. For most people who are 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per day, their meals are going to look fairly similar. They're going to be eating a similar amount of vegetables, similar amounts of fruits, similar amount of protein. And it's just what you get, where you get your protein. That's pretty much the only difference for the most part.
Exactly. Yeah, no, fantastic. It's build that template first, isn't it? And then look at those areas. So no, fantastic. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of where a vegan, health conscious athlete person needs to be at. If they want to go ahead and follow the only evidence-based vegan on the ground.
I might have to change my Instagram name to that. The evidence-based vegan.
Hey, if you could coin that and become the top name in the space, you'd be absolutely killing it.
In the space, absolutely. I'm not a massive Instagram sensation, but if anyone does want to follow me or the gym, it's Jack Collins _ETC, or you can follow ETC_fit for the Empowerment Training Center. Some more content will be coming through that soon. So next month we're officially opening to new members, men as well.
Cool.
So it was just women. We're now branching out to men and women and offering different types of classes as well. So whilst it was just our core program, we're now going to have a weightlifting class and it's called Unbreakable. So it's more like a CrossFit style intensity
fit cross
class. Fit cross. Sorry, TM.
I need to TM that.
Yeah. So that's where you'll generally be able to find us.
Cool. Nice one. Okay. Well, Jack, thanks again for being on the show. I'll link up that in the show notes. And thanks again.
No problem. Great. Thank you for having me. I'll make sure I got my PhD for next time.
Yeah, we'll reconvene in about 6 years for both of us to get that behind our belt.